Hello and welcome to this special show on Rajya Sabha television, wherein we bring you all the aspects of India's fight against COVID-19, be it the technological interventions, the vaccines, the drugs, the work being done by our health workers. And now that we have entered into lockdown 4.0, there are certain easing of norms which is happening in terms of reopening certain activities, restarting some economic activities as well, and reopening some facilities such as public transport. Now that is our topic for discussion today. Some states have already done it, opened public transport in a gradual way, step by step. We will talk about today what needs to be done, what are the kind of guidelines or what are the precautions which need to be taken, and how we can go ahead and tackle this challenge from here onwards. So let me first introduce the guest to you, beginning with Mr. Srivastava. He's the principal advisor with NITI Aayog. Welcome to Rajya Sabha television, sir. We also have with us Mr. Bharti. He's the Joint Secretary with the Ministry of Road Transport and Highways. And we are also joined by Ms. Shreya. She is the South Asia Policy Lead from the Institute for Transportation and Development Policy, that is ITDP. Welcome, Shreya, to you as well. And Mr. Bharti, let me begin the show. And let's begin with you, Mr. Srivastava. And let's begin by trying to understand, when the lockdown happened in the last week of March, entire public transport, be it rails, buses, autos, taxis, metros, local trains, everything was shut down. That was required at that point in time. Now that we have entered the fourth phase of the lockdown, there are certain easing of these norms, and in certain states, several states, some of the public transport has started functioning, obviously with a lot of caution and a focus on social distancing as well, and other aspects also looked into. So what are the broad basic guidelines or principles which need to be kept in mind when we are reopening sectors like public transport?
Well, when we are restarting the public transport system, we have to take into account as to where we were earlier pre-COVID stage, and then how do we want to move forward with that. The corona pandemic, to my understanding, should be used as an opportunity to have a comprehensive view of the entire public transport system and the way it should be in India. Because a lot has been said about the public transport system in the country, and we probably have been looking at it with a different perspective when we compare it with the different countries and particularly the developed countries. So this break of more than 2 months gives us an opportunity to have a very broad perspective and a relook at the entire public transport system. So, I mean, it would be a detailed discussion, but to sum it up or to give it to you in a very focused points, let me say that we cannot have the public transport system the way it was happening prior to the pre-COVID days, or the way we were running our whether the state-owned public transport systems or even the privately owned transport systems. The public transport systems were much below, or rather had much to offer to an average expectation of a public transport system to a citizen in the country. Mm-hmm. And when you visit the developed countries or the other countries, very often we come back with the memories and we keep talking about it as to how the public transport system is there in different countries. Now, we always talk about our populations and we always talk about our resources. But the issue is that the resources cannot always be there, which can be taken a shelter to not think progressively and to some extent to hide our inefficiencies. Mm-hmm. So if the railways are offering a very good transport systems to millions of passengers, then railways cannot be giving an answer the way people used to travel in the general compartments, in the unreserved compartments, and likewise. A new kind of a business model must evolve, which should provide a better, rather, or different kind of a option to an average citizen of the country in terms of the public transport. Now, we are talking about having 20 passengers in each bus, following the social distancing norms, and likewise in our public transport systems. But we also cannot ignore the fact that these things to a smaller extent were already being followed in a developed country or in a proper way of public transportation system. That social distancing used to be there and it is already there, and it is just that we are being reminded of it as a citizen. So, to my understanding, a better business model must evolve, which should take care of the social distancing, which should also take care of the basic hygiene things which are to be made available in the public transport systems, and they should also provide an option to an average citizen. Now, how is it going to come? Uh, if the experience which the common citizen or we all had during this lockdown period has been that we have seen the benefits of the pollution, lesser pollution. We have seen the benefits of the lesser, major environmental considerations. Now, with those kind of experiences, we all have started thinking that we must have lesser number of vehicles on the roads. Now, if the number of the vehicles on the roads are to be reduced, if the pollution or the combustion pollution from the vehicle is to be reduced, then the solution is that of the public transport. But then again, the public transport with social distancing and with a better quality of the options to be made available, there is a lot which needs to be done.
Okay, and we'll come to that as well as to what exactly can be done there in terms of boosting the infrastructure as well, so that all these precautions can be naturally taken and taken into account there by all. Let me bring Mr. Priyank Bharti here from the Ministry of Road Transport and Highways. Mr. Bharti, your views on the focus areas from here onwards, and as Mr. Srivastava was pointing out, one of them will have to be boosting the infrastructure, the public transport infrastructure as well. It cannot be only about limiting capacity and ensuring social distancing.
Yeah, good evening. In fact, what Mr. Srivastava is saying is absolutely true. And in the given circumstances, with the conditions which we have, and as we have been kind of reading also through various media, this will continue to remain there. It will persist. So we have to live with it, and we have to live with a different lifestyle. Secondly, there have to be kind of because of the limitations of how do we do it? Because the production capacities, the manufacturing base, everything is kind of affected. So I think in times to come, maybe let's say a year or so, maybe 2 years, whatever. So we'll have to live with a kind of reduced kind of a output. So in that case, we have to have some innovative solutions. It could be maybe when you're talking about buses. So there are maybe have to be some models where the buses, let's say, which maybe which are not being used, have to be put into operations. We have under the law different kind of permits. We call it a contract permit, a stage permit. So now we have to think for some flexibility. We have to think in terms of how these two can or other kind of schemes permit have to kind of merge and to provide a citizen with better options. So we have to live with that. And secondly, as Mr. Srivastava has said, it is not that we can't do. There are instances all across, in fact, the world also, as well as in India also. And I may just also point out, we recently got that Motor Vehicle Amendment Act passed. So that provides us with various options. In fact, there are a lot of provisions where the states, who provide these transport-related services, can tinker with the given regulations, so that the citizens can be provided with better options, with enhanced capacities, so that at least they are not kind of hassled for the condition which we have during the lockdown. As Mr. Srivastava has pointed out, we have to live with this. We'll have to live with this, the limited capacities in all sort of transport. I may also just like to point out that when we are talking about this public transport, we also should also refer to the goods transport, because all throughout the good transport had been a key factor for delivering the essentials, for delivering even the medicines, everything we talk about. So all throughout, they have been providing and have been giving good services. They're also, in fact, in the cabins, whatever, the drivers are traveling, the cleaners are traveling. So there also we have to be very sure, what kind of social distancing norm they have to follow, what kind of hygiene, what kind of sanitation measure they have to follow. Similarly, it is all an ecosystem we are talking about. Let's say when a bus, because bus starts from a bus station, so like in a bus station also there are a lot of many protocols we need to kind of tinker with, because when somebody is first and the foremost, when somebody is buying a ticket, why we should have some mechanism where it should be maybe through IT or electronic ticketing. Then when somebody is queuing up, then it has to be with a social distancing. In a bus stations, the hygiene, the sanitation factors have to be looked into. The transport, it has to be kind of all sort of things have to be now taken due cognizance when we are kind of going forward.
Okay. So making more use of technology, easing the rules and norms out there so that all these things can be followed. Let me bring in Shreya here from ITDP. Shreya, what do you say, or what's your perspective of the situation we are in right now and the kind of norms or guidelines which obviously keep on changing because this is a dynamic situation with respect to the way we are opening or trying to reopen our public transport slowly, step by step, and what more needs to be done here?
Sure. So I'd say that there are some very clear set of guidelines of how you can maintain the safety of staff. How you ensure that bus crew is safe. Only healthy bus crew are deployed, and how they need to be given masks, etc., as well as maintaining passenger safety. And I think it's essential that we have the rule of no mask, no bus, which means if you don't have a mask, you cannot get into a bus. And that's a very critical step that we need to ensure that COVID doesn't spread. But I'd like to bring our attention to a more deeper point that we have, which is something Mr. Srivastava had already pointed out. See, the expectation that presently our public transportations work only for people who are terribly dependent on them, and they have no other option. For lack of a better word, I could say what we have presently is oftentimes public agencies look at public transportation as something that they would give for people who are choiceless. But instead, what we want is public transportation should be for everybody, and it becomes a mode of choice. Now, a bigger question about capacity essentially boils down to the question of money, right? If you want to maintain a certain physical distance, which I would say we should have maintained even to start with, rather than packing people like sardines on trains and buses, which is how public transportation used to be, we cannot let it be that way. We need to make sure that public transportation is a desirable user experience, which means that you need to have more capacity for the same number of passengers. Now, this is possible only if there is more money that's put into public transportation. Now, let's look at it from a different perspective, which is that of the capacity question. A bus passenger occupies a minuscule amount of space compared to a car passenger. Typically, a bus passenger occupies only about 1/10 the space of a car passenger, and about 1/5 the space of a two-wheeler passenger, or somebody who's on a motorcycle. Now, if we do not have space on public transportation, we are limiting capacity. The only alternative people would have is we would end up pushing them towards private motor vehicles, which means that you would need more capacity not in a bus but on the road. And there is no way that we can keep expanding the capacity of roads, and which we take as if it's a free commodity. Roads are not a free commodity. Roads are not free. They must be a commodity, which means that you must start charging for them like London does or Singapore does, and instead expand the capacity of buses and even train systems or metro systems, as the case might be, to ensure that people travel safely and with a very good user experience.
Okay, and that's a long-term, obviously long-term perspective here as well, which you pointed out. Investment is something which will obviously take time, and the way you're pointing out, obviously the public transport infrastructure needs to be further strengthened. But the situation we are in right now, Shreya, and if you look at the way reopening is happening, buses have been allowed in certain states, autos, taxis have been allowed with restrictive capacity and all that. Similarly, there are other public transportation measures as well, which are not yet open. For example, metros, local trains there as well. So obviously there are more challenges. What more can be done in terms of ensuring that COVID-19 pandemic is also tackled, and public transport, which is a necessity for most of the people in this country, is also available to them.
So Vishal, I would say it boils down to the question of capacity at the end of the day. There is no other option. Right now, as you start gradually opening, yes, the demand would be low. People are still wondering what exactly the situation might be. But as we've seen from cities in China and Southeast Asia, the demand has returned back to public transportation. Nearly 80% of it is back. People are traveling on public transportation, which means that they are taking adequate measures to ensure that there is safe capacity. So that is the only alternative. And the way you could do that is by start getting private sector also involved in it. But private sector would be involved in it only if there is financial support. At the end of the day, it boils down to financial support. And without financial support, the way private sector works, the informal transit works, is to pack people.
Okay. Let me bring in Mr. Srivastava here on this aspect. Mr. Srivastava, as Shreya is pointing out, capacity augmentation of the public transport system is the solution here. Obviously, we can't go back to the pre-COVID days, as you were also saying earlier, and capacity augmentation or the infrastructure augmentation would require more investments, perhaps private sector pitching in as well, perhaps some policy tweaks from the government also. Mr. Srivastava?
Yeah, I would say that certainly the more assets are needed, the investment in the infrastructure is needed. I mean, I'll just give you the figures. We have an average of 12 buses per 1 lakh of population, whereas for any decent public transport system, we should have 100 buses per 1 lakh of the population. So the deficit is that of the 1/5, 1/6 kind of a thing in the road public transport, that is the number of buses. But the issue is that, Vishal, that our entire public transport system is based upon unviable business models. We do keep running our trains, we do keep running our public transport system, we keep putting pressure on our state undertakings, our railways, likewise with a very, ill-conceived, I would say, socialistic kind of a thinking. There has to be a proper business model to run the transport system, and then we have to see as to what kind of as just now it was said, what kind of a subsidies or what kind of assistances are needed. We should not be subsidizing the inefficiencies of the public sector undertakings. We should not be subsidizing or assisting the corrupt practices or even the issues which are there in running something in a very business-like or in a professional manner. So this is an opportunity when it should be relooked, it should be revisited, and then we should go into it. But yes, in the short term, Vishal, we will have to have our public transport system running. The public mobility is to be there along with the goods and the freight, as the Priyank was mentioning just now. We need to open it up, but with the kind of guidelines which are needed for taking care of our social distancing, taking care of our issues of transmitting any whether it is corona or any other issues related with that. So public transport has to start with that. We have to stagger the office timings if it is required. We'll have to look into those issues. But in the long term, we must make use of this overview or the things which we have experienced during the last 2.5 months and take the very corrective measures which are very much needed in the public transport system in the country.
Okay, Priyank, your views on the long-term approach here. Obviously, short-term, we would all talk about, limiting capacity or implementing social distancing norms, because that is what is required to go ahead and tackle the challenges thrown at us by COVID-19 pandemic. But in the long-term approach, we will have to look at this entire situation in a holistic perspective so that we don't find ourselves back at the same place where we were in pre-COVID days.
Yeah, obviously. In fact, people have started thinking because, this, as Mr. Srivastava rightly pointed out, whatever be it, it has given us an opportunity to rethink. So, for the policymakers, for the manufacturers, even for the, normal citizens. So obviously there is an opportunity lying with all of us, and everybody is trying to think of out of the box solutions. So as Shreya has pointed out, generally there would be solutions, but it is not key a solution which was maybe fit for a European country, or maybe a state of America would be appropriate for us, or maybe a solution which was kind of appropriate maybe for Brazil would be an appropriate solution for us, because we have to our demography is different, our terrain, many business models are different. So we are kind of are having an opportunity, and an opportunity to, in fact, I'll say, to think in a fashion where we'll align kind of our transportation system. We should have a better kind of multimodal mix, because generally as of now we don't have an integrated, you have a train station, but you don't have a kind of mobility where you have the last mile connectivity, and similarly you have a bus, you don't have three wheelers, or something as a last mile connectivity. So all these things have to be taken, thought upon, and maybe kind of futuristic planning have to begin right now, because there are countries who do a kind of 50-year planning. Singapore does it, then they divide it into 20 years, something like that. So why not us? So this is an opportunity, we would do it. Why not we?
Okay, definitely. There it is, the time for us to have that futuristic planning. Concluding comments from you, Shreya, before we bring this show to an end.
Sure, thanks. So like Mr. Srivastava said, I think it's essential to make sure that whatever public support is coming, whatever you want to call a subsidy, but I'd like to call it an investment into people's well-being, should help people rather than the inefficiency of an operator. And the way you could do that is very easily through technology. We have the technology available, whether you use a common mobility card, which you could give out to all citizens, and put money as a top-up into people's cards. For every trip that they make, they pay only half. The other half could be paid by the government, for example. And you could very easily track whether people are what kind of services people are choosing, and based on which you could even prioritize, even get private sector involved in the process to make sure that the better serving ones get more business, while the lesser serving ones do not get the business. But what you need eventually is that you need money and you need technology, and through money and technology, you can improve user experience and user safety. You have an opportunity, a very big opportunity, to completely transform the informal transport sector that we have in this country, which serves the majority of people in India, especially in northern India. Some of the numbers that we have are dramatic. The entire urban public bus fleet in India is about 30 to 35,000 buses. London alone has about 15 to 16,000 buses. Beijing has 25,000 buses. So it's time that we rethink. Of course, we'll have to think about local solutions, but I think we have the ability to reinvent and reimagine our transportation for the future. And that future needs to be public transport oriented. It needs to be based on walking and cycling, where we prioritize how we allocate our street space for better walking and cycling. And together with walking, cycling, and public transportation, we can provide everyone a better mobility experience, rather than them being choked in cars or motorcycles, breathing bad air and dying.
Okay, definitely. There it is. Three keywords: rethink, reimagine, and reinvent. That's the call of the time here. Obviously, there are certain challenges which have been thrown at us by the COVID-19 pandemic, short-term ones. Those are being looked into with various guidelines and norms coming in from center, state government, local administration there as well. But the long-term challenges are the one which will have to be looked into in a holistic manner, and perhaps an integrated approach with more investment into infrastructure and use of technology as well. Thank you so much, Mr. Srivastava, Mr. Bharti, and Ms. Dahiya for sharing your views with us. We'll come back again tomorrow with a different topic. Till then, you keep watching Rajya Sabha television, and don't forget to follow all the guidelines, specifically with respect to the social distancing norms, because this fight is being fought by people like you and me, who will now step up our houses to work. And that is where we will have to be very careful.
And then I would say that even masks are even more important than social distancing. So we should ensure that masks are the new helmets, and we cannot do away with them. Let's make
Definitely.
Sure
Definitely. There it is. One more suggestion coming in. Not only social distancing, but yes, masks. And masks can be considered as new helmets, since we are talking about the public transport system. So keep watching Rajya Sabha television.